Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
On Ask the A&Ps, we take your toughest maintenance questions and we try to solve them. So if you have a question, please reach out to us at podcasts@aopa.org.
And if you like the show, make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Don't miss an episode.
And if you'd like to get on our email list for our monthly newsletter and periodic maintenance stories, the easiest way to do that is to text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777, and a little email bot will ask you for your email address and add you to the list. That's text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777 to get on the list.
So I've had some interesting requests. Two interesting things are happening. One is now that I have space behind me, all the guys in the shop want to do weird things, while the podcast is going on. And I've had customers ask, if I show up on podcast day, can I stand behind you and wave?
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So I may have to put up that ugly welding curtain back there, or something. I did have another interesting thing. Don't know if this is all that interesting, but I received from someone I've never heard from before, and I don't want to hold the whole thing up here, an actual letter written on paper requesting some help on a P210. I've never gotten a letter in writing, in the mail, in an envelope with a stamp in the mailbox.
Wow.
This is from a podcast listener?
No, this is just from somebody with a 210 and they need some help, and someone referred them to me, and he shows not only phone numbers and address and everything, but also an email address. So he's
very good.
He's somewhat tech savvy. I'm just wondering why he didn't go to the website and send it there. So I just thought that was kind of hilarious.
Maybe he's just tech savvy enough to read emails, but he hasn't quite gotten to the point of being able to send them. I don't know.
I'll let you know when I'm going to respond to him here after the podcast. We'll see how he goes. But it'd be a great question for the group, though.
I've been writing a lot of holiday cards across the holidays, and I find that my penmanship is awful because I'm so used to typing that, the act of writing is just foreign, isn't it?
It's definitely a dying art.
Okay, our first question is from Pat, who is perilously close to overhauling his engine. Go ahead, Pat. We want to talk you back from the brink.
Off the ledge.
Off the ledge.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks very much for having me on. And by the way, thanks very much for what you do. This is really, the podcast you put on has really become an institution, I think. At any rate, our Diamond Star just went into the shop for its annual inspection. And the shop says that one of the cylinders, cylinder 3, is not airworthy after doing the compression check and borescope examination. The engine is a Lycoming IO 360 M1A. That's the original engine on the DA40. The airplane was built in December of 2003, so it's 19 years old. The horsepower on the engine is 2,400 and the takt time is 2,000, so the engine's well beyond the recommended TBO. The shop says they aren't comfortable replacing a cylinder on an engine that is this far beyond the TBO. I'll read you some of the exact words they sent me in an email. The compressions are all very good except for cylinder number 3, which is 42. The lower spark plugs looked okay, but all had evidence of oil presence. On the borescope, all the cylinders had more than the normal oil present in the cylinder bores, on the piston and the cylinder head. The number 3 exhaust valve is showing signs of heat distress on 2 sides with valve rocking on and off the seat, indicating a worn exhaust guide. The shop owner says his assessments, it's time for an overhaul. Obviously, number 3 needs to be replaced or repaired, but all cylinders are contributing to the oil consumption and color and smell of the oil. The borescope shows no cross-hatching left, and number 4 is showing some lengthwise scratches in the bore. So Glenn says since the engine is 20 years old now and over TBO, it would not be a candidate for a simple cylinder replacement. we feel is too great a risk to the internal crankshaft bearings, saddles, and bearings getting disturbed. This could cause a spun bearing and an unintended engine failure. The risk of this happening is too great, especially on a high time engine. I'm pretty much of the philosophy that you espoused, that I'd much rather replace a cylinder if everything else looks okay. I have recently put an overhauled engine in our Baron because the camshaft had spalling on it that didn't meet the specs of Continental. And so we wound up getting an overhauled engine from Western Skyways. But in the case of the Diamond Star, which is, do you want me to use shop names?
No, we don't need to do that.
All right. The shop we've used for years, and I respect them. But is there some way of getting around the bad cylinder, maybe all bad cylinders? And full disclosure, we went ahead and ordered an engine from Lycoming, which if you can convince me otherwise, I'm sure we could sell very easily. So what do you think?
We'll try to convince you otherwise.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that just drives me up the wall. And I have run into this. We're not comfortable replacing a cylinder on an over TBO engine before, so that's not unique to this shop. But it's just such absurd nonsense. Let's dissect a couple of these things. The first notion that somehow or other a high time engine is more likely to have a spun bearing after a cylinder change, that is utter nonsense. There's absolutely no engineering basis for a statement like that. The bearings have steel shells that don't wear. Okay, they have wear surfaces bonded onto them. They're tri-metal bearings, but the backing of the bearing, which is what holds the bearings in place and is responsible for the bearing crush, is steel, and it doesn't wear. And a 4,000-hour engine has the same bearing crush as a 50-hour engine. It just, that the notion that that you're more likely to have a spun bearing on a high time engine after a cylinder change doesn't make any sense at all. Now, I have seen spun bearings after top overhauls where the shop did not take the proper precaution of using torque plates and so on. I've never seen a spun bearing after the change of a single cylinder, because one of the basic rules about avoiding spun bearings is that you never want to torque relieve more than one pair of through bolts at a time. Well, if you're only changing one cylinder, you're only torque relieving one pair of through bolts. So you don't really need to take any special precautions. So, I mean, that's just nonsense. And four-cylinder Lycomings, we frequently see them go to 4,000 or 5,000 hours. The bottom ends are almost indestructible, with the exception of the possible spalling of the cam and lifters due to, disuse or living in a high corrosion environment. That's always the risk when you remove a cylinder. One of the bad things about removing a cylinder is you get to look at the cam, and you might not like what you see.
Keep your eyes closed when you take it off.
So
you'll be okay.
So my advice to you, well, first of all, you may have to go to a different shop, because it sounds like your shop is committed to euthanizing this engine, whether it needs it or not. That you're probably not going to dissuade them from that. So you may have to go someplace else. I don't know, but certainly what I would do is, the first thing I would do is I would try to lap the exhaust valve and see if you can get the compression back up to where it ought to be without removing the cylinder.
Well, but his borescope, I think, is this the one where we have borescope pictures? It sounds like that valve may be.
Yeah, it said it was wobbling on the seat.
Yeah, so I don't know if.
But I've seen an awful lot of wobble without causing compression problems.
I remember the one you sent me a video
valve,
of.
That
That looks
valve
good.
doesn't
Okay.
show any heat distress. That
Yeah,
valve
Yeah.
is
looks
like
fine.
dead perfect. Look at that. It's like a
Yeah.
bullseye.
Yeah,
That's not the
so
valve they're talking about, is
so
it?
maybe you could convince them to try that first, and it might bring it back up. I mean, they seem convinced that the engine's a goner.
Right. I have a feeling that they're not going to be interested in rescuing the cylinder or rescuing the engine.
Hmm.
So you may have to get another mechanic who's got a more enlightened view.
Look at the really clean
That
Yeah.
that
line
valve
on the
looks
valve.
beautiful.
Yeah,
What
that's
the heck are they
awesome.
talking about? Is that the number 3 exhaust valve we're looking at?
I'm assuming the pictures he sent were number 3.
Because that valve looks gorgeous.
It's making
That's
the seat's making perfect contact
if
all the
if
way around.
if the
Pat, what is?
compression is being lost out the exhaust valve, which sounds like it is,
Yeah.
that valve looks like a perfect candidate for lapping, and it probably wouldn't take very much to restore the compression.
What is your oil consumption? You didn't mention.
I'm not sure that it's nothing unusual. I mean, it's probably in the range of a quarter or 8 or 10 hours.
Oh, that's
Wow.
Oh,
awesome.
jeez.
And these exhaust valves that they're showing in the pictures there, I don't see
Yeah.
anyone that shows heat distress.
No, absolutely not.
So
And-
it
and-
sounds like they're
Okay,
averse
now
to
this one, I can see where they might think this one
on that
is.
8 o'clock position there.
Yeah, so at the
Yeah.
8 o'clock and the 2 o'clock, I do see some changes, but
Mhm.
it's not turned green
very,
yet.
very
Minimal.
minor. I mean,
But
Yeah,
if you
lap
lap
that
it,
one.
you could catch that.
Absolutely.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's if that has any distress at all, it's in the very earliest stages.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
great.
Well, cool that they
Catch it.
caught that. I mean, they're looking, they know what they're looking for, but I think lapping that valve would be the way to go.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
sounds
Sure.
like they don't want to pull a cylinder because they're worried about disturbing the bearings. But maybe you could convince them to lap them instead and nurse
Okay.
it along and just take it year by year
Yeah.
and see how it goes.
Now the other issue is, there's no crosshatch left, which is no surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At any high time engine, there's
Doesn't
not going to be a
matter.
crosshatch left. But as long as the oil consumption is acceptable, which it sounds like it is,
Mhm.
it's nothing to worry about. Also,
Yeah.
oil puddling in the cylinder is not
That's
an
normal.
airworthiness issue unless it's so bad that you're
You
having
can't
spark
start.
plug fouling
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
But if the engine is operating normally, the lack of crosshatch and the oil puddling are basically non-issues.
I mean, having run my engine,
Ooh,
my
that
IO
valve looks
360
A little more
past
interesting.
well past TBO, past where you are. I started to have oil. I started to have not morning sickness, but oil in the cylinders, so a little bit of hard starting. So it's a geriatric engine. It's kind of like as we get older, it's hurts to get out of bed, So, but it's not as Mike says, it's not an airworthiness issue. It's
Yeah.
not terms for euthanization. So if you can convince
Oh,
them,
I thought I was the only one that it hurts to get out of bed. I'm
Oh,
glad
no.
to hear that there are other people with the same issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing any valves that look exciting, and certainly it's an excellent candidate for lapping in place, and I almost can guarantee that it would restore the compression to
Yeah.
high
And
60s, low 70s if you did that.
it is so nice to keep running the engine that you have confidence in, that like the back of your hand. It's not good to switch to something new because it invites all kinds of potential problems, ADs, infant mortality issues where the engine, will fail in the first 100 hours. I love running my engine for years and years and knowing exactly what I'm getting.
Yeah,
So,
mine's at a little over 2,200 hours, and I don't intend to do anything to it. And I got in trouble last month for admitting that I pulled some lifters just to see how the cam was.
yeah, we chastised you for that.
But I just had to know because I
That's
could
what
save
we
mine.
call the technical term for that is morbid curiosity.
That's right. But on yours, lapping that one valve and your engine, I wouldn't touch that thing if I could get away with it.
Yeah, I would try to lap the valve simply because if you let them pull the cylinder, that opens Pandora's box. They'll find some more reasons that they want you to euthanize the engine. So, and interestingly enough, it's a Lycoming, and unlike Continental, Lycoming doesn't have any guidance about cam airworthiness.
Mhm.
Continental has some very specific instructions, but Lycoming doesn't, which means that it's kind of up to the mechanic to decide whether the cam is okay or not, and that's a very bad situation because you never want it to be up to the mechanic, especially because these mechanics obviously are spring loaded to want this engine to get sent off somewhere. So
Well, they're by the book.
And do we need to have a discussion about how long it would take to get an engine overhauled? I mean, not that that's you don't put that in your airworthiness decision. That's purely a financial decision.
He said he's already put a new engine on order. So
Yeah.
Well, on order doesn't mean a thing. I hate to say it, but
Yeah. They said they hope May.
Oh,
sorry.
Well,
I didn't mean to laugh out loud.
But
if
you cancel that order, the next guy in line would be really, really happy.
yeah.
But
as
at
you
any
said,
rate,
though-
I definitely that cylinder is a great candidate for valve lapping in place. And if the shop doesn't want to do it, find some mechanic who does. It's a couple of hours to do that.
But it might be a good idea just to keep that engine on order. As you said, if you don't use it, someone else would probably love
sell
to have
it, profit, right?
Yeah. Oh no, I have no doubt about being able to dispose of the engine.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
I hope we convinced you. I mean, I think you were convinced before we started, right, Pat?
Well, I've listened to all your shows, and so I understand what's going on here. So I appreciate it very much.
The next question is from Jim, who's doing some belt tightening, maybe post-Christmas belt tightening. What's up, Jim?
Well, first of all, it's my first. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay. First of all, it's my first time live, and it's really a terrific opportunity to talk to you people directly. Mine is an issue that's caused me a lot of frustration. The alternator drive belt keeps popping off. The belt has about 140 hours on it, and we believe it to be the correct belt. I've put a straight edge on the two pulleys, the drive pulley, the engine drive pulley, and also the alternator pulley. I put a straight edge, and it looks like they're in alignment. The alternator was overhauled, and bearings and brushes were changed. So it'll fly for maybe, this is a Cessna 182, by the way. It'll fly for about, maybe 10 or so hours, and it flips off. And I am checking the tension on the belt, the tension and I push down on the belt in the middle about a half inch. I do all of those things, but I don't think I've solved the problem. I don't think I've found the root cause.
Well, you got several options here, and it's really common on the 0470. I don't know why it always decides to happen right after you put a different alternator on, but it seems that it does like to do that. There's the possibility of counterweight issues, but that doesn't make sense that would happen because you've changed an alternator, except that you have a different balance on the newly installed alternator. But you can get vibrations and oscillations from the pulley. You can also have grooves in the pulley that will make the alternator belt roll. And then when it rolls and twists, then it breaks and falls off. The engine-driven pulley, or the drive pulley, as we call it, is on a shaft, and that shaft moves forward and aft. And sometimes when that shaft is worn, it will move forward and aft way more than you want it to, or the shaft bearing is worn somewhat, and it will be moving up and down or in and out. As you tighten the belt, the shaft is no longer parallel to the alternator shaft. So that puts the pulley, it doesn't look like it's out of alignment, but it may be just a little bit. Those are just a couple of quick items that you can check, but the pulley would be probably the low-hanging fruit to be looking for, to see if you can get an improvement on it.
So
The
replacing it?
the drive pulley is mounted on the starter adapter, right? It's a shaft that comes out of the back of the starter adapter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's on
yeah.
the back of the engine. Yeah, left rear.
So it has to be replaced in whole with the starter adapter?
So yeah, that would it's that the pulley is mounted on an extension of the starter adapter shaft gear, if I recall correctly. So is it can the free play on that be checked
Yeah, I mean,
to
it's
see
a simple.
if there's something worn in
Yeah,
the
with the
starter
belt
adapter?
off, you just grab hold of the pulley and push it forward and aft and see how far it moves. And depending on which version adapter, you can contact Niagara Air Parts or one of the other shops that do starter adapter work, or you can look in the Continental manual and it will tell you what the allowance is.
But the other thing that Paul mentioned, which is definitely a concern on these engines, is the possibility, and it's relatively remote, but it's a possibility that you might have a detuned crankshaft counterweight, and there's torsional things going on with the back of the crankshaft. And I think probably the best way to rule that out would would be to get somebody with a dynamic prop balance rig to do vibration check on the engine when it's run up to something like cruise power, and see if there's an inordinate vibration.
I used to think that was the silliest answer. Of course, I know now that that's a really a good answer, because in my mind, I thought, okay, this is a big hunk of aluminum crankcase and all that, and surely this thing isn't moving that much. And I was talking to our friend Bill Ross many years ago, and he was describing an event where Continental ran one of their engines under a strobe light, and just took a video of it. And he said it looked like it was liquid because it
Flapping
moved.
around.
It was just moving around. He said, if you ever saw that video, you'd
Yeah.
never fly behind one of these engines again. You just never get in it.
I read that. Yeah.
That's
So
Well,
just
I've
nuts.
seen videos, the stop motion videos of propellers, aluminum propellers, where the blades are have all these standing waves in them and stuff. It's just
Yeah.
it's amazing to watch.
So I was really surprised in just searching online that this is a really common problem with the
It is.
182. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of discussion. I think I saw it on Cessna Flyers or something like that.
Mhm.
Cessna Flyer Association. And there were suggestions about checking the bearings, checking the play and the pulley. I think what we're saying is do the external things first. You don't want to like split your case because you think maybe your dynamic,
Yeah.
there's any kind of vibrations inside the engine. Do the stuff you can do outside the engine first, which would be to check the pulley for play in the bearings or in the pulley shaft.
The thing to think about is you changed an alternator and that caused all this to begin. So the counterbalances on the crankshaft, nothing really would have changed with those, more than likely. Although, as I said, the balance of the different alternator may be responding to the existing balance of the engine. So there is a change in play between the two. But just like Colleen said, it's definitely check the easy things first, and they're easy to check and they're way less expensive. You can get to the counterbalances by removing the two back
Rear
cylinders.
cylinders, yeah.
So you don't have to necessarily, split the case halves. But way before you get to that point, let's check these other things.
There is no play side to side on that drive pulley, but there is a little bit of front and back play, maybe as much as 32nd of an inch. And I think that a lot of that is probably taken up as the case expands and heat. I think there's intended to be some play. It's not zero. I check the.
No,
I
there
can
has
check
to be
the
some
set.
play.
Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be some play, but you
Yeah.
want to make sure that it's within the limits.
That should be.
There are limits on that.
That should be easy enough to check with the play to the engine case with the thickness gauge.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
The belt is the correct belt, and it doesn't show any fraying on the side of the belt like the like there's something out of line. Usually when you look at the belt and there's white, thread showing on the edge of the belt, nothing. And there's 140 hours on the belt. So,
so what brand of belt are you using? Is it let me ask this, it's a V belt. Is it a continuous belt or is it a segmented belt?
it's a segmented belt with the segments on the inside,
Right.
and the belt is some product supplied by Continental. I don't know the manufacturer of the belt.
I would try as an experiment, try a solid belt and see what difference that makes.
Okay.
I also saw somebody suggested you check for wear in the pulley's V groove.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was talking about with checking the pulleys. Yep.
This would be the drive pulley.
I think so.
Because the alternator pulley's
the alternator pulley's new.
Yeah.
And the commenter said you can actually take the old pulley to a machine shop and have them reface it to restore the groove face and angle.
I've never had that done.
I know. It's very interesting. This was all on the Cessna Flyers.
See,
website.
every owner of an airplane should be a member of at least one, maybe three owners groups.
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
that is worth every penny, even if it's free.
There's just as an aside, there's about 600 hours on the alternator.
Yeah.
It could be. I mean, I've never had a problem with this, but it sounds like 182s. Everybody was chiming in and saying, "Yep, I had that."
It's a thing. It really is.
Well, I can note based on the ammeter and based on the voltmeter, I can tell when it throws a belt.
Yeah.
And then we bring.
It's real obvious.
We bring the airplane back to the airport, and that's the end of it. And we take the top cowling off and put it on, re-safety and everything. How about that belt tension? Is it safe to go between the two pulleys and push down 1/2 inch? Is that about the right tension?
Seems like
that sounds a little loose to me.
Yeah. It's a little more than I do.
I think isn't there something in the manual that says you're supposed to apply so many pounds of force and you're supposed to get so much deflection?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah,
There
but
is a procedure in the service manual. And if you don't have that, there's another test. I don't think they'll have numbers for it. It's a slip test. You put a torque wrench on the alternator and turn it, and it should break loose at one tension or at one setting, but not at another. I don't think that's listed in the 470 or the Cessna manual. But yeah, the deflection, there is a test and it's in the manual, or it should be.
Yeah, this wouldn't be in the engine manual. It would be
it'd be in the
aircraft manual. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
Great question, Jim.
Yeah, that was a new one for me. So very interesting. Good
Well,
luck with
you're
that.
a Cardinal owner.
Our next question is from David, who is doing some late Christmas shopping. Go ahead, David.
That's right. I recently purchased a Piper Lance Turbo, and I've heard Mike say on the show a couple times he carries a few critical spare parts with him in his 310 and has been known to make repairs on the ramp. I've read his article on the emergency toolbox, I believe. So my question is, what spare parts would you A&Ps recommend owners have on hand? And more importantly, which of those spare parts would be recommended to keep on board during cross-country flights? Now, since sending in the question, I've had a couple of AOG experiences that have started my my go bag of parts. So, for example, I now carry a main tire and tube. I carry a spare fuel boost pump.
Wow.
I've got a Piper plug and a jump pack with me, a quart of oil, and a basic set of tools. But what else?
That must have an interesting effect on weight and balance.
Yeah. I have two criteria for this, and everybody has a different opinion. And one criteria is you only take along with you things that you're willing to change.
Yeah.
And the second one is take along with you things that most shops aren't going to have in stock. Like if used to back in the early Cirrus and Columbia days, nobody kept low profile tires in stock. So you definitely wanted to take a tire along. Well, nowadays, Behringer wheels, you want to take a tubeless tire along with you and maybe the special tool for jacking the airplane, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where I start.
Yeah, my experience with this is that it's very, very airplane type specific.
Yep.
My first airplane was a Cessna 182, a very beloved Cessna 182 that I bought brand new from the Cessna factory in 1968, and it was a wonderful airplane, but it used to go through voltage regulators on a regular basis. Now, this was back in the days when the voltage regulators had vibrating contacts. They weren't solid.
Go Remy. You go borrow some off a Chevy.
After the second time that I got stranded and spent a night on a hard bench in an FBO because the voltage regulator had crapped out and I was waiting for one to be FedExed into me, I decided I was going to carry a second voltage regulator, a spare voltage regulator, so that I would be prepared for these failures. Of course, the rest of the story. The minute I started carrying a spare, I never had another voltage regulator failure because that's the way it kind of works.
That's what you do, yeah.
The spare parts radiate a force field.
That's the logic.
Somehow. But, now I'm flying.
That's the logic I'm using behind loading the plane up with all these spare parts.
Right.
So now I'm flying a Cessna 310. The voltage regulators never fail; they're solid state. But the 310 has a habit of going through vacuum pumps, and the vacuum pumps are the big 400 series vacuum pumps that because the airplane has de-icing boots, and they're expensive and nobody keeps them in stock. So I always carry a spare pump with me and the special trick wrench that you need to get that one nut that you can't get to with a regular wrench.
A chisel and a hammer will do.
And that's that's an important point in terms of carrying tools. The most important tools to carry are the ones that you're not likely to be able to get at your local Ace hardware store. If you need a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, you can almost always find one somewhere. But if you need safety wire pliers, that's going to be harder. So the most important tools to carry with you are specialty tools that would be hard to procure locally if you had a problem. And the most important spare parts to carry with you are ones that have let you down in the past.
That's how I'm building my list. So,
and don't forget the duct tape.
Duct tape and tie wraps for sure.
Duct tape and tie wraps, and duct tape comes in airplane
and
colors.
Maybe a little JB Weld, while you're at it. But,
I don't have
Colleen,
the time
what do you carry in your plane?
I went to Alaska and I dragged a vacuum pump the whole way up and back, and it never failed. It was high time, and I thought that's was
because you had a spare.
Cheap insurance.
That's right.
But I did use the duct tape because I put a hole in in my tail, one of the plastic tips on my tail, and duct tape came in very handy. And it was
it
white.
The right color?
It was white. It looked great.
Perfect. Yeah.
So, but I'm guilty. I carry a first aid kit, but I really don't carry anything other than a stubby screwdriver so I can take my cowl off.
You do know that it is now possible to buy clear duct tape, don't you? Which is
no, I didn't. Really?
If you have to duct tape something that you wouldn't want an FAA inspector to notice that you duct tape, clear duct tape is the way to go.
I don't know. They're
But
pretty
if that's a
short-sighted.
hole, maybe you want the white.
Yeah, the white works great. But
Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate the time you take to share your knowledge with all of us in GA, and really this is amazing, valuable information to all of us. Great. And thank you. And as you referenced, Mike wrote a great article about this. It's called Traveling Toolkit. And it's in his book, Airplane Ownership Volume 1, but it's also an article that he wrote in AOPA Pilot in July 2017.
Yeah, Google
and
it.
we've got a copy reproduced on the Savvy Aviation website under resources. So if people want to read more about Mike's suggestions, they can go there. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
I just fly around and hope nothing breaks. So,
All right. Thanks a lot, David.
Thanks, David. Now we've come to the winter section of our show. I didn't know we had a winter section, so this is a new thing. Our next question is from Will, whose cylinders need a blanket. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I guess my only critique of your show is that you guys don't put out more episodes, but I know that y'all have lives that you have to, other things you have to do. So I fly a 1965 PA 24-260, a Comanche. I put a remanufactured engine in it back in 2020 after I had a catastrophic failure in North Carolina. And when I did it, I followed Mike's advice. I put in a CGR 30 P&C combo. So I have a fully functioning engine monitor with more features than I could possibly ever want. And so normally I fly out of Jessup.
There's not too many features on an engine.
It's a nice unit. I looked it up. It's beautiful.
That's true. Yeah. I do love it. I normally fly out of Jessup, Georgia, where it's normally warm to extremely hot. So the cylinders I'm used to seeing around 275 to, I would say, 325. And I recently put a new set of front baffles on it to help the temperatures even a little bit more. But as I get into the winter months where it gets down into the frigid temperatures of like in the 30s in Georgia, the CGR alerts when I get into the 190s. And so on long descents, I'm seeing like, the 190s a little bit, and I'll just increase power a little bit and bring it back up above 200. And I went so far as to contact Lycoming, who said, as long as you stay above 150, you're fine.
Wow.
But I recently took a trip to upstate New York, where the OAT was negative 17 degrees Celsius.
Oh my.
And I had a long descent, and
you should never have made that trip. That was a bad decision.
I know. My parents live up there, so I gotta make it every now and then. No,
yeah.
But it's great for, it's nice to climb out of cold weather like that, as opposed to the high density altitudes you get here in Georgia. But I had a really long descent going in there, and it was pretty choppy, updrafts and downdrafts. So I'm, exercising the power to manage my airspeed, and the CHTs are dropping and dropping and dropping, and they eventually get into even the high 140s. And so I'm getting beyond the point of where Lycoming is saying, is the safe zone. And I know that the probes are working right because they're registering the correct OAT when I'm sitting on the ground before I turn it on. But my question is there's tons of information out there about, keeping CHTs, below, Lycoming says I know Mike says 400 is kind of like the standard for, I guess, 450 for Lycoming, 400 for Continental. But there's really not a ton of information out there about, CHTs, what is too low. And now I will say I didn't notice anything abnormal about the oil temperatures, and I didn't notice any degradation in performance. And I've flown the plane since, probably half a dozen times without any issues. So the question is what damage, if any, is being done if you go below 200, and then what, if any, damage is being done if you go below 150 degrees.
Well, let me ask real quick. So you have the Electronics International system in there. It's installed as primary. So you have all the CHT probes that screw into the bottom of the cylinder?
Yeah, it's the primary engine instrumentation. Everything else has been removed.
Okay.
But they're the screw-in type.
They're the screw-in type.
Not a gasket type.
Not a gasket on the spark plugs or something.
They're the screw-in kind.
Okay,
I don't know that I've seen an engine run that low, except for maybe Adrian's engine when he flew over the poles.
Does the Comanche 260 have cowl flaps?
It does not.
No.
Does not have cowl flaps.
No.
Okay.
So this is a 65, so that's the first B model, right? You have 3 windows or 2?
It's the straight 260. So they took a 250 and just made it fuel injected, but it only has 2 windows on the side.
It's the only year of the 260 with only 2 windows on the side. I used to have a Comanche for about 13 years. I don't know that I've ever seen one run that cold.
And it's not an oil temperature issue? You said the oil temperatures are above 180.
When you say normal, maybe? What are they doing? 180, 200?
So if I gotta pull the data, and unfortunately haven't done that, but I would say
you have not pulled the data yet?
What's your N number? No, wait, don't do this. I'll look you up. Yeah, you need to pull the data.
Yeah.
But
I mean, if the oil, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I would estimate that the oil temperatures were not at 180. I think they were around like 160 to 170 at the time.
So could he add a winterization kit and block that oil cooler to bring them up? Would that help?
Well, that would bring the oil temp
Oil
up. It's not
temperature
going to
up,
do
but it
anything for
wouldn't
the
help with the cylinder head
CHTs.
temperature.
Well, but won't that help the engine run warmer because the oil that's bathing it is bathing
Well, I
it,
think it
you know,
would help
splashing
the
it.
engine. It wouldn't do anything to change the CHTs.
Mhm.
So the cowling on the Comanche is the air inlet is huge, and there's not a thing that isolates the spinner like on the newer ones. So when the air comes in the sides, goes around the cylinders, it comes back forward over the top of the crankcase and spills out at the spinner, or that's one of the possibilities. And usually the loss there is so much that CHTs are, at least my experience was always that CHTs were easily in the 300s, and in the summer would be 380 or so, and usually have one that's barely topping 400. I've never had a problem with cylinders being overly cool. So I think you should take some of your baffling out. No, don't do that. I'm just teasing. Don't do that.
So, but
Well-
let's talk about what the issue is with being cold. Isn't
Yeah.
it lead
The-
scavenging?
you know, there's
issue?
there's two different scenarios. The cylinder could be running cold because it's running at low power, for example,
Mhm.
or it's being it's being lean, either excessively rich or excessively lean.
Hmm.
Or it could be running cold even though it's being operated properly and at fairly high power. Now, if it's a high power situation, the concern is that the cylinder may be running cold because the OAT is very cold, but the piston is running hot because it's not air cooled. And if the cylinder is cold and the piston is hot, you get inadequate clearance between the piston and the cylinder, and you start getting
Scuffing.
piston skirts scuffing and vertical scoring on the cylinder walls and stuff like that. And I think that's the basis of Lycoming's recommendation that CHTs not go below 150. Obviously, CHTs go below 150 when you throttle back. But that's okay because you're cooling down the piston and you're cooling down the cylinder, and so everything is still going to be okay. How do you lean this engine as a rule?
So I usually operate weight of peak. I've watched all of your webinars and and researched that to my satisfaction to operate lean of peak. Now, on this specific descent, I was dealing with a lot of updrafts and downdrafts, so it was requiring me to exercise the power more. So I was actually full rich during this descent, which
Okay, well,
is
that's
not something-
probably a big
yeah.
part of the
Right,
problem.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
There's no reason to go rich
Mm-mm.
on a descent like that. If you do normally have to richen a little bit as you descend, but if you don't richen enough, the engine will remind you by running rough,
Right.
and so there's no reason to be going full rich. And if you're having low cylinder head temperatures in cruise when you're running lean to peak, you probably should be running a little less lean to peak to bring the temperatures up.
Yeah, make
It's
more
not- I
power,
would
go
say-
faster.
Oh no, I try to take it as fast as it'll go, but it's
Go
usually it's usually not a problem in cruise. It's usually when I'm descending from like 9,000 feet is
Oh,
when
yeah.
it becomes
Yeah,
an issue.
it sounds
Yeah.
like
Rich.
you're enriching inappropriately during descents, which is gonna make the problem worse.
So when you climb, do you lean as you climb to maintain an EGT?
I don't, not as I climb. I
Oh,
leave it full
well-
rich, and then as soon,
No.
Sorry, go ahead.
Let's change everything.
Yeah,
So in your climb, when you take off, I assume you've done gaming lean test and all that sort of thing to see what the balance is on your cylinders. Now that you have this wonderful, oh no, you haven't done that because you haven't downloaded your data yet.
Oh, jeez.
Sorry.
I've done
Oh.
it, just not for that flight.
Okay.
There you go.
No, okay. I'll let you off the hook this time. Anyway, so in a climb, you take off, and somewhere when you're not terribly busy, maybe 500 to 1,000 feet, note your EGTs. maybe 1250, depends on where they mounted the probes. Hopefully they mounted them in a place where you're getting about 1250 degrees, maybe 1300. Pick one. And then as you continue to climb, you lean the mixture to maintain that EGT. That'll keep your fuel air ratio the same as it was at takeoff. You'll use less fuel for the climb. You'll make more power because that full rich is just throwing unburned fuel out the exhaust. It's no value to you at all. And so lean as you climb, maintaining that EGT all the way to 9,000. When you descend, you can basically do the same thing in the descent. As long as you're not asking the engine for more power than what you had at 9,000 feet or 10 or 12 or 8, 6, whatever it is, then you just enrichen to keep about that same mixture. And you don't need to manipulate the throttle in your descent because just let it go fast. Now, if you need to slow down for turbulence, just pull the power back to some setting and then begin enrichening from there. So absolutely, you want to lean in the climb and enrichen in the descent, but not full rich. That's
I want to throw in a cautionary note here because Paul quoted some EGT numbers, and I'm afraid some listener is going to say, "Oh,
right.
I need to maintain 1250."
No.
The EGT that you're going to see is dramatically dependent on the compression ratio of the engine. So if you're flying a Cessna 182 with an 0470R, you're going to see much hotter EGTs than what Paul was quoting because the EGTs that he was quoting would be appropriate for a high compression engine, but not for a low compression engine.
Well, it also depends on where the EGT probe is installed.
Sure, exactly. And that's what I said about the mounting of the probe. So let me back up and see if I can say it correctly. Because if I don't get this right, Colleen accuses me of getting stuff wrong at the end of the show. So
we're recording this, Paul.
Yeah, no, it's all speaking to my lapel. What I should have said, when you get to that 500 or 1,000 foot range after takeoff, note what your EGT is. That's your target EGT, whatever number it is. If it's 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, if you have normalized mode, you can hit that button and then all of your EGTs will stray from that number. You don't really care what the number is because it's not a real number anyway. And you're just trying to maintain, and you don't have to be exact, just generally lean as you climb to keep something close to that. It'll give you something to do in that long climb.
That's true. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
In the winter.
And don't go full rich on descents, please.
Yeah, don't do that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great
good to
plan,
hear. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the help. It's a lovely plan. Now, hopefully, I don't have any more engine failures that take it away from me.
Yeah, let's don't do that.
Oh, we didn't hear that story. That's for next time.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a good story there. Okay, well,
Thanks
be
for the
safe.
call.
That's a good one. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks,
See you,
Will.
Will.
All right. Bye-bye.
Our next question is from Carl, who might be the only pilot who has ever worried about too much power. Go ahead, Carl.
Okay, I fly a Cherokee 180 built in 1967, and a few years ago I had the engine rebuilt, so I'm very concerned of making it last. And part of my strategy is to try to use the airplane regularly. My target has been using it at least once a month, and I try to keep that schedule even in the wintertime. And there's one aspect of winter flying which worries me a little bit, which I've never seen discussed, so I thought I would bring it up here. That is, I live on the East Coast and low altitude, but still gets pretty cold. And when I check the weather and check the pressure altitude, usually it's negative in the wintertime. 1,000 feet, sometimes even 2,000 feet below sea level. Now, my understanding was that the carburetor is calibrated for sea level operation. It would seem like as I get more and more power, at some point I might not be getting enough fuel for correct operation. So I'm wondering if you ever heard of any engine damage attributed to very low pressure altitude operation.
I have never seen. There's not
Yeah.
anything in the POHs. I did saw someone post on with a 210 in Florida that they had to pull the throttle back on takeoff once because they had too much manifold pressure. And I said, how did you base that? There's not a maximum manifold pressure listed anywhere in the POH.
Yeah.
Man,
It's more fuel flow is important, right? It's like being turbocharged. Almost.
I don't think it's an issue. It is true that that at very cold temperatures with a carbureted engine, the mixture is going to be a little bit leaner than it would be at sea level, and that will cut into your detonation margin a little bit. But the takeoff mixture is so god awful rich, and detonation never happens unless you have quite high cylinder head temperatures.
Yeah.
So I just don't think it's an issue, and I don't think it's the kind of thing that where you should consider, using less than full throttle for takeoff or anything like that.
let her rip.
I mean, theoretically, your thinking is correct that the carburetor and the enrichment circuit and the carburetor are calibrated for sea level. But I think what we're trying to say is the cold temperatures and the couple thousand feet that you might see in very extreme conditions isn't enough to really eat into that detonation margin enough to be concerned. But theoretically, you're thinking along the right lines.
Because you have a ton of detonation margin. Now if you'd installed 10-to-1 pistons in there or something like that, it might be more of a concern. But if it's a normal certificated engine, the amount of detonation margin that you have at takeoff power with the full rich mixture is so large that cutting into it a little bit because it's cold is not going to be significant.
I can't imagine before we had engine monitors, nobody would have ever thought of this. It's like, and everyone at takeoff is wide open throttle, and most like Cherokees and 172s don't even have a manifold pressure gauge, so they have no clue what that manifold pressure is doing. So I think if it had been a problem, we'd have cylinders coming off of engines over the last 70 years at a much higher rate in the winter than what we do now.
I don't know. With global warming, temperatures are much more extreme. So I think that's the problem now. It was a cold winter. It was really cold.
A cold winter.
Yeah.
No, I do not have any real instrumentation. That's the reason I was interested in something I need to be concerned about. Or
That's
not.
a great question, though.
Your thinking is right on, Carl, but I think it's just not a concern. It actually doesn't end up being any kind of detonation issue for the engine we're talking about.
Yeah. Totally.
But I applaud you for following through on the physics there.
Okay, well, that's reassuring. It's one less thing to worry about.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And hopefully spring will be right around the corner and the temperatures will go back up.
But you won't have all that performance.
Yeah.
Although I do have one limitation. I do not start the engine unless it's 32 degrees or more.
Yeah, that's, or even more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear you there.
Well,
Okay,
thanks for a great question.
Great thought process, Carl. We really appreciate the question. It made us cogitate a little bit. There was smoke rising out of Paul's.
Cogitate?
Cogitate.
Oh, man, I have to go look up another word.
Okay, ruminate. Jeez.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. Well, it looks like we've made it through another podcast. We count on you, our listeners, to let us know what we got right and, more importantly, what we got wrong. We always enjoy hearing from you. Please keep sending us those tricky mind benders, and maybe we'll host your question on the next show. You can always write us at podcasts@aopa.org.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.